So many of our young folks now were in prison for nonviolent substance abuse disorder issues.
Right.
We need to continue to allow those populations to turn those old felonies into misdemeanors. We have found those old felonies were immoral, and they put really a lifetime sentence on folks, because when they come home with felony records, they can't get access to quality jobs. It took years for us to have one of the largest prison systems in the nation. It's going to take time for us now to repair the harm for a lot of those folks who were caught up in that system.
Hello and welcome again to another episode of Sacktown Talks. Today we're joined by Lola Smallwood-Cuevas. Lola, you're from the Senate. How's it going? Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here.
I know. So welcome to Sacramento. You know what, you've been up here for what? Was it 5 months now?
5 months.
So how have you been adapting and adjusting to going back and forth?
Well, I was always joke that when I land at Sac Airport, there's sort of, I grew up on Twilight Zone. There's this wavy portal.
Yeah.
And you jump through it. And in that portal, the day is 28 hours. And so it's jumping into that 28-hour day portal and meeting with so many amazing folks, and then debating and interrogating just a vast array of issues, and then trying to meet with, my staff and other members. It's quite a challenge. And when I have two beautiful teenage daughters, a teenage son and daughter, I leave them behind, jump through the portal, and it's quite an adventure. It's quite an adventure.
It's always interesting. I grew up here, but flying down to LA, you fly into this big city, and then you fly back in here, and you're like going over like farms and water, and you're like, where am I? This is California?
It feels wonderful to land in LAX and to see that like vastness of twinkling lights and humanity. But it's also, exciting to be here elected to do the people's work and to see this beautiful capital, this, Californian sort of base of democracy. It's not some conceptual thing. It's real. It's palpable. It's vibrant. It's intense. But it's a beautiful process. So I'm just really grateful to the people of the 28th District. Really grateful to the great leaders who've paved the way for me to be here in Sacramento. We talked about my predecessor, Sydney Kamlager, and the amazing Holly Mitchell, Supervisor Holly Mitchell. So, big shoes to fill indeed. But, feeling like I have all of the right energy, and this is, just such a powerful opportunity.
It's pretty cool. I remember during, was it February, Tina McKinnon was kind of doing this, lineage of Black women to serve in the legislature.
Yes.
And a lot of them happen in your district, the 28th. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the 28th Senate district?
Sure. So the 28th, I call it the heart and soul of LA County, and other members, no offense, but it represents the best of Southern California, the best in terms of LA County, LA City. It moves from West Mar Vista, travels along Olympic Boulevard to all of Culver City, goes down into the richness of South Central Los Angeles, right to the Inglewood border, and then continues east to Alameda, past downtown. So it is. If it were not for the 28th District, I don't think LA would be LA. I don't think LA County would be LA County from racial diversity, ethnic diversity, gender diversity, political, progressive ideas, innovation. Extremely organized in terms of organizations that are doing profound work to solve a lot of the crises that we have here, not just in our county and in my district, but in the state. And, I see my representation really as an evolution of a lot of that movement. I've had the opportunity to work in community and labor organizing for the last 20 years, to work with that sort of expanse of humanity, really moving progressive ideas and experimenting with new ways to build public and private partnerships. And so, the 28th district, where it goes, so does California.
Yeah, California.
So that's how I think of it. It really is generative for the rest of the state and the rest of the country.
Yeah. We were talking before off camera. Your mom was in the Navy. So you grew up, born in New Jersey, and then you said you made your way to Oakland. How old were you when you finally made it to L.A.?
So made it to L.A. For a little while when I was 14, and then met my partner in college and came back to live permanently. I think I was 24.
Where'd you go to college?
24. I went to Cal State Hayward in the Bay Area. My partner, UC.
Came back up north, huh?
UC Berkeley.
Wait, it's not Cal State Hayward anymore.
No, it's not. It's Cal State East Bay.
Yeah.
Cal State East Bay. But, being raised by a single mom who was 17 when she had me and had to make some choices about the life that she wanted. And of course, my name is Lola, so she had some big ideas about what her life would be. And so California was her destination, and she saw this really as a field of dreams. And, I was so grateful to have a chance to grow up part of my life in the Bay Area. But when I saw Los Angeles, I'm like, this is why people move to California. This is where the real opportunity of a vibrant, economy, a vibrant landing pad for so many different types of communities. Where we have, a vast number of urban, environmental, health issues, housing issues that we have to tackle, but at the same time, a belief that we can do better. And I think that's what Los Angeles, my district, represents, is communities that continue to strive and push to do and be better, to be a better California on a number of fronts. So, I love, the wide streets. I love the palm trees. And of course, I love the Lakers. Sorry, Lakers. I don't know what happened yesterday. But all that to say, it is quite a privilege to live in the 28th district, and it's getting harder and harder for families like the family I grew up in to stay, to be there, to continue to participate and be in proximity to opportunity. And I think, part of the work that, I'm here to do is to make sure that all Californians, and particularly all Angelenos, Culver City residents, Mar Vista residents, that they all have equal opportunity to participate in whether it be our economy, whether it be access to clean water and air, whether it be, the ability to not have to get in their cars to travel, to have real transportation, to having a good and quality job, a life with dignity and respect. So, I know the challenges that we are up against in this 21st century. There are a lot of forces, some in our control, some not, that we have to address. But I'm committed to do what the folks in the 28th District expect me to do, which is to fight for the things that are important to them and to make sure that we have an equitable and fair society and a state that creates an equity toolbox that folks can draw down on to improve their lives through the public policies that we pass here.
It's interesting. I have a nephew who lives in Las Vegas, and he wanted to become a police officer. And I was telling him, I was like, wow, the LAPD needs people. They're begging people to go work for them. And I was like, I just Googled Manhattan Beach. I guess Manhattan Beach has its own PD. You get paid $87,000 to go through the academy, and then once you're through, you get $117,000. And he was like, yeah, but I can't afford to live there, even on that salary. Kind of that seems like to be the struggle, right? Everyone would love to live in LA in some of these areas, but it's so expensive. Kind of what are some of the answers to kind of make, housing more affordable, like increasing the supply somehow?
Well, I think the legislature has done a great job, and I think my predecessor was definitely a part of that. One thing is we want to make sure that local residents, counties and cities within LA County have a place at the table really talk and work through these issues. One of the things that Sidney Kamlager helped to pass was a local authority that would allow housing stakeholders to really think about how to address the housing crisis, but not from just a LA City perspective or from a small city perspective, but from a regional perspective. And I think from the state level, I want to say that is our in some ways, that's our North Star, is to really understand what the needs are on the ground and to ensure that we are providing the right resources, that we are ensuring that we are streamlining processes so that you're not waiting 2 and 3 years to get a permit to build affordable housing. It's our responsibility that we are creating the kinds of wraparound continuum of care services that not just address the material brick and mortar homes that people need, but also, quite honestly, the supports and services that they need to stay in their homes, whether it be good jobs, whether it's behavioral health services, whether it's making sure that folks have adequate transportation to get to and from their homes and get to work, whether it's to make sure that, they continue to earn enough to be able to afford the housing that's provided. I was at an event with my West LA neighborhood council this weekend, and there were a group of residents who came up to me and said, what we really need is subsidies to help folks pay security deposits. And at some point, we've got to prioritize, and when you ask the question, what can we do? We've got to prioritize progressive revenue streams here at the state. When we have to subsidize security deposits, when we are having to subsidize affordable housing, when we are subsidizing rents, when we're subsidizing mortgage payments, the total sum of the scenario is that Angelenos and Californians are not earning enough money to be able to sustain themselves. Right. And we have, at the same time, a moment where there are just exorbitant and largely coming from the federal government, just exorbitant tax cuts that are allowing the ultra wealthy to continue to be wealthy while the majority of our folks are struggling to the point where we're being asked to subsidize security deposits for rent. So I think we are at a crossroads here in the state of California. As you talked about, your family member who earning $117,000 and still can't afford housing. We're at a point where we've got to be able to create a balance in terms of how we are all having a fair share in a shared prosperity model that allows us to keep businesses in California, to make sure we have the value added here in California that allows them to grow, but at the same time that we are employing all of our residents in a way where there is a living wage, a fair wage that allows families to sustain themselves. I represent LAUSD, and 80% of the students within LAUSD are at and below the poverty level. 80%. Those are their families. Second largest school district in the country. And so education can't just be about, the ABCs. Right. It has to be about the holistic way that we care for students and those families so that they can learn, because they are the future of this state. So, it's deeply complex. It's not, just a clear-cut sort of black and white issue. But I think what is clear is that it has to be a balance. We've got to raise the floor for those vulnerable families, and we've got to create incentives that allow our companies to provide a fair share for all Californians to thrive and be sustained in this state.
So you said, when you were 24, you moved, you graduated from what college, you moved to LA. So, and then you said you were doing community organizing for the last 20 years?
Yes.
So kind of what as a young graduate got you into kind of community organizing and working that line?
So when I came out, and this is, you're part of the journalism spectrum. Yeah. When I went to journalism school, I was a newspaper reporter. Okay. And I came out as a newspaper reporter just as the industry was, the internet right. was born. And so I was an editorial assistant during college, ended up being a night cops reporter, and got word that my job was going to be cut because the newspaper was being bought out. This was the Oakland Tribune. And learned about unions, had a shop steward who said we have to try to keep these jobs, and joined with the brothers and sisters in the print room all the way to the copy desk to try to keep our jobs. And in the end, we were able to hold on to those positions for a couple of years. I ended up leaving there, went to the Long Beach Press-Telegram, and worked at the Long Beach Press-Telegram, and the same thing happened. Newspaper was put up for sale. Everyone was being laid off. And it taught me a lesson about, what it means to work, what it means to be a worker, and what it means to come together to really fight for each other's ability to have some dignity on the job, right? To not be laid off and, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. Fast forward, I ended up leaving the newspaper industry, and obviously
saw the writing on the wall.
Yes. And a good friend of mine was doing a research project with SEIU, and got a chance to work on that project. And this was working with the Justice for Janitors Local, which is a renowned union that showed that we can organize undocumented workers who are in the janitorial sector and ensure that they could sustain their families and earn living wages, and to really bring the economy of Los Angeles in particular together around those workers. And I got involved in that campaign. We ended up organizing private security officers who were largely Black men and women from South Central Los Angeles who were in that field. And I was part of the great, victory to build a union for those workers. And I saw their lives change from folks who were, in SROs and sleeping in their cars because their wages didn't allow them to be able to afford their apartments, to actually, getting their own place and having security for their families. And once I experienced that in journalism, it takes a long time to make those kinds of changes, but these workers coming together were able to do it in a short amount of time, and I felt like that's where I want to spend my energy. And so I continued to work with the Stand for Security campaign, and then transitioned to the UCLA Labor Center, where I went back to doing more research and looking at low-wage workers in particular, and how do we build equitable pathways into quality jobs, particularly for unemployed workers and low-wage workers. And out of that research and work, developed California's first Black Worker Center, which was really focused on bringing those vulnerable workers together, looking at where were the sectors that had severe underrepresentation, and working on policies and corporate practice change that could open up opportunities for those workers. At the time when we formed the Worker Center, 50% of Black working age adults were unemployed or in jobs that were paying $11 an hour or less. And there's no community that can be sustained when 50% of its people are in that kind of a crisis. So that work taught me a lot about hope, determination, what seems impossible, but through coalition, through working with employers, with unions, with community-based organizations, policymakers, we were able to make tremendous change through the Black Worker Center, which became a model, and now there are 17 centers across the country, and one in San Diego, Inland Empire, and LA here in Southern Cal. And so, some of the things were, supporting project labor agreements that built sort of a network of rail lines in LA and increasing Black worker participation from 2% to 25% on those projects. We fought for, we were a part of the steering committee of the Raise the Wage campaign and really advocating for the $15 an hour increase in the basic costs of living for workers. And we helped to establish Los Angeles' first civil rights office. And these were some of the projects that we worked with in each step of the way. Again, coalition, where there were employers at the table, there were community groups at the table, there were unions at the table, and there was a strategic effort to not just build up, Los Angeles, but also to create folks on a pathway to self-sufficiency and opportunity. So as I say, this is an evolution of movement, getting to Sacramento, all of the coalition building, the relationships, the sort of strategies that have been experimented with and have worked on the ground. Is there an opportunity to really look at those strategies at the state and macro level? So those are just some of the experiences that I've had, and again, working in the 28th district, where our coalitions were so broad that we had the faith community and legal advocates, housing advocates, transportation advocates, worker advocates, all coming together around common goals. So is there a way to solve the crisis that we're in? Yes. And
You're the first person to say that.
I absolutely believe it. I absolutely believe it. And, I feel like a lot of my colleagues in the Senate also have that strategy, even, looking at this budget, when you're looking at, down the barrel of a $31 billion deficit. It's a lot. But, I think in the Senate, and particularly in the Senate Dem Caucus, we are, really committed to strategies don't force us to lose ground. That helps us to protect our progress. That helps us to make sure that our most vulnerable communities are cared for, and that we continue this funding, and that we don't balance budgets on the backs of poor folks, and that we really look creatively at how to generate revenues that help our state really grow into the future, because we are still operating on sort of 1980s revenue streams. Right. We haven't really had a full adjustment in terms of what it costs for our state to operate at the size that it is, and the dynamism in terms of all of the challenges and opportunities that we have. And so I think it really is exciting to see that there are legislators who do believe that we have what we need to be able to move forward. It's just, how do we continue to build the coalitions and have the conversations that get the votes that we need to move those issues forward.
So what is it? 2020 redistricting happens. Sidney Kamlager says, I'm running for Congress. What in your mind then makes you say, I want to run for Senate?
Well, as you can tell, I really love the work that I do, and I was absolutely happy to be a project director at the UCLA Labor Center and directing the Care at Work project and supporting the worker centers that I had helped build, in the mid 2000s. But Sidney Kamlager is pretty persuasive. You talked about, it really was her integrity to say, okay, I'm going to be moving in this direction. I really want to have a strong leader, a strong progressive leader step in behind me, and to make sure that, unfortunately, still the case that there's a Black woman in the California State Senate. I am the only one. She was the only one. And had I not run, the question is, would we have even had a Black woman in the California State Senate? And that was really a question that I felt I needed to step up to make sure we had an answer for. This is a representative democracy. I think the voices of women of color critically important, and to have a state senate that does not have a Black woman in it is unacceptable for progressive
That's crazy.
California.
You said that, and I started thinking, I was like, oh, yeah, you're right.
Right. And so, and I think our communities have been through so much over the years, and I personally have allied with so many organizations over the years, whether it be the immigrant rights community, LGBTQ plus community. I know that when you have a strong progressive leader, if that voice is not there, all of our communities lose. And so I stepped up to the challenge because I felt it was important to do so. It's my first time in public office, so I do tend to have a little bit of a rose tinted.
I have a little rose. It at all?
Well, she did in the sense of as coming from the outside as an organizer, as an advocate. There's the system, right, and there are folks who are pressing the system to do better. And my view is, when you're outside pressing the system to do better, you're part of the solution. And then when you're kind of lumped into the system, it's like, okay, well, what does that mean? And for me, it was, what are the kinds of changes? What kind of impact can I have? I know what impact I can have outside, right? But what can I do inside, especially as the only Black woman in a whole bicameral system, right? In one whole chamber. What does that look like? So, I think what was clear is that I knew her record, and I knew the record of Holly Mitchell. I certainly knew the record of now Mayor Karen Bass and what they were able to do in the California State Legislature. And all of California is better because of it. We were just talking about the LAO and how the LAO came about. It's like, Senator Holly Mitchell was a part of establishing the LAO to have an independent view, right, at the budget. Phenomenal contribution, right? So, when we think about those contributions and as a freshman coming in, right, an 8 to 12 year, pathway, there's a lot of positive outcomes that can be transformative in the same way that so many in the 28th district, through their ideas and their, commitments and their volunteerism are pushing, that there's an opportunity to do that same transformation and to do it, together. So I feel I was convinced by her argument, but also inspired by the work that these other leaders have done. And I came in with a phenomenal class of legislators.
It's really nice. We've got to know some of them. A lot of women, a lot of energy.
Yes,
it's incredible.
It is, and I think alignment, right? And so that's going to grow and mature and get stronger over time. And I think we are all folks, too, who understand, or at least I know for sure, no one can do it by themselves.
Right.
And these issues are so complex that we need everyone to weigh in. We need to hear from labor unions. We need to hear from businesses. We need to hear from community-based organizations. We need to hear from our colleagues, about all of these issues and perspectives so that we can get to a deeper fix for our community. So I feel that, this is a historic time for California. Again, I say we're at these crossroads. You think about what's happening on the federal level and sort of the forces that want to pull us back 50 years. And here in California, we're saying, no, we're looking at the 50 ahead. We're not trying to go back and relitigate and reopen 50-year-old arguments. That is wasting our time. We have a future that is waiting for us. And this is the bridge. The public policy process is the bridge to it.
Like one of the, I guess, most important parts of making policy is having a relationship with your fellow senators. And it seems like this is like one of the first times I can remember where there's a bunch of new senators coming in, and you guys are all hanging out, having fun, and it looks like you guys are having a good time. What's it like, kind of coming in with this new class and kind of building relationships with them and kind of working on policy together?
It's great. I mean, it's great, and it's a learn and do. We're doing. I say we're building this rocket ship while
Right.
we're flying it at the same time. But I have to say, the Senate leadership has done a great job of laying a foundation of just knowledge. How does this process work?
Right.
What does this look like? And so the pro tem also just, even like, this is the budget process. This is how it works. These kinds of, I want to say, institutional supports have been phenomenal, right? So we do have, in some ways, as a freshman class, a common point of departure, which I think is really important. And then, Senator John Laird, like he's been here a long time. He's had a lot of different roles. He has
Right.
these great stories. Again, sharing knowledge. Senator DeRosso and her experience. We have shared similar experience. So her sharing Senator Lena Gonzalez, who's my seatmate, learning from her, Senator Glazer. It's another different perspective,
Right.
but sharing that perspective, I think, so I feel like there's one thing I know for sure is the sacrifice that folks are making to be here. I have 2 children and a partner, a dog, back home. I'm a sandwich generation. I have my mother and my children, so it's a sacrifice to leave them to be here for 4 days. And I think I have respect, for that. I think we are getting now into the meat of the matter, right? The heart of the matter,
Right.
as we get into the actual policy decisions. And I feel I have the best district in California, and certainly everyone else does too.
Right.
And each district has its own perspective and priorities. And so it's just, how do we, again, come out in a way that better positions all of our communities. And I think that's the process that we're in now. I think that our freshman class is so new. We don't know a lot of the old, history of the past, but I think there's a commitment to respect the humanity of this process,
Mm-hmm.
and to know that we're in the Senate, and we have to move the work. I do say, it's about respect. It's about hearing the other person out and wanting to be heard. It's about the battle of ideas, not the battle of personalities and ego. I've encountered some of that too along the way,
yeah.
right? And so, I think for me, I know why I'm here. I know who my people are. I know what my North Star, is in this work. And it is to come out with those most vulnerable communities in a better position than when I got here. Mm-hmm. And so when I am coming to an issue, that's what I'm coming to the issue on. That's what my constituents are expecting from me. That's what I'm expecting from others. But I realize there's a lot of different positions and hierarchies that I'm starting to navigate. But at the end of the day, if we aren't making a difference for these communities that are hardest hit, no matter what position you hold, our state is going to be in continued crisis. And this is the time, at this crossroads, at this moment, where that has to be prioritized. And these discussions have to, no matter how tense they may get, it's important for us to have those discussions and to push on those pressure points to make sure that our most vulnerable, most underrepresented, most hardest hit communities are being heard.
So you just went through your first quarter, I guess, maybe first trimester of the session, right? You introduced bills. You went through the committee process, went through approps. How are you looking coming out of suspense here?
I went in with 9. I came out with 7. We lost two, and they said don't fall in love with your bills.
Right.
But I lost 2. I did lose 2 of my babies. I lost 2, and one bill was about background checks and really trying to make background checks the exception and not the norm. Not everybody. I shouldn't have to fill out a background check to get a job. You shouldn't. There are very prescribed classifications that require that.
Right.
And aside from that, it should not be the norm. If we are decarcerating, if we don't want to be a carceral state, we need to then go back to a system where that is not prioritized for every Californian applying for every job. And so I was sad to see that bill lose that bill.
Suspensefully vanished.
Yes. But we're still working to figure out next steps. The other bill was really about saying that as we move into this green revolution, as we are talking about moving to electric vehicles only in the state of California, we have to make sure every Californian, I want my residents who live at Florence and Normandy to also be able to have EV charging in their communities. And right now, if you're in a multi-unit dwelling, you can't really charge your vehicle, right? And so we did not get that bill out, but I think, again, these are important issues that we can't stop the conversation on. How do we bring them back? But
I hear there's a budget process.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yeah. And we have
Sounds
7
like
amazing
pilot.
bills, that are moving forward, and that we do have headed over to the other house. We're really excited about these bills, and they are at the intersection of worker justice and economic justice. We want to.
Did your staff prepare you like you're not going to get 100%? Like you're going to lose a couple of these babies? Like what was the thing? Like because suspense is a mystery to all of us. Like how were you feeling going in? And
I would told you about the institutional.
Right.
They were early on. There was like day one. That was like part of this process. So we could weather it. But
things
it was
pretty cordial
tough.
on the Senate side. You guys got it pretty easy over there. You guys are good to each other.
We are good to we are good and fair to each other, and this process was laid out fairly in a transparent way. I think what we didn't anticipate was what was happening on the budget side and to what extent, right? Coming from this $97 billion surplus to now this $31 billion deficit. It just had really like a shiver down the spine of all good policies, right? Because, is it the cost of doing this great work? Can we afford to do this work right now? So we knew that question was on the table going in. My staff is amazing, and they helped to really prepare me for this process with our bills. But it doesn't take the sting out of it when you look at the list and you're
still
like,
looking important,
it's like, what happened? And he wore a yellow jacket that day. It was a very sunny yellow jacket. I was like, you know what? You are being very deceptive with that jacket today. But in all seriousness, Appropriations Committee, it is what it is in the process. We just have to continue to fight for those bills and to figure out ways to continue the conversation. And in the meantime, the bills that I did get out of committee, getting them over to the other side, presenting so many on the floor over the next week or so to make sure that we can get them passed.
Get your gloves on over there for the assembly, right?
Yes. So that's, things
Start
like
taking Chris Holden out for coffee now.
Well, some of these things are, looking at severance pay, for grocery workers, right? So there's this huge, merger that's happening. 2 of the largest grocers in the country. Whenever there are mergers, there are certainly layoffs. I have 1 unionized grocery store left on Crenshaw Boulevard in my district. And we want to make sure that those workers, are protected and we can keep it. If it leaves, not only do we lose those good jobs, we also have a serious food desert So my bill is about saying, let's protect these workers. If there are layoffs, we pray there will not be any, but if they are, that a worker has at least 1 week for every year that they've been employed. And we need workers to weather this. This is an economy where one missed paycheck, is a difference between being in your apartment or on the street. So we want to make sure that these workers can weather this financial storm. My other bill is the Equal Pay and Anti-Retaliation Act. And, as workers are, as California has passed so many progressive worker protections, we want to make sure that when workers exercise those protections, that they don't face any retaliation, that they can go through the process without, being threatened with termination or having their hours cut, or being isolated on the workplace. And we've heard from so many workers where this happens just because they are accessing the laws that we have passed as a state. So we want to make sure that, if there's any sort of disciplinary action taken against a worker after they filed a complaint, that the employer proves that they're not retaliating against the worker. We think rebuttable presumption allows the worker to just go through their claim process and not have to prove retaliation. We think the employer, if they're not retaliating, they should be able to say so and prove that. So we want to protect, those workers. And lastly, we want to make sure that the law that we passed, Prop 47, very important, as we have, the war on the poor or the war on drugs, however you want to call it, disproportionately impacted Black and brown communities. So many of our young folks now were in prison for nonviolent substance abuse disorder issues. Right. We need to continue to allow those populations to turn those old felonies into misdemeanors. We have found those old felonies were immoral, and they put really a lifetime sentence on folks because when they come home with felony records, they can't get access to quality jobs. Right. So right now there was a sunset on Prop 47 applications. We want to remove that. It took years for us to be one of the highest, have one of the largest prison systems in the nation, in the world. It's going to take time for us now to repair the harm for a lot of those folks who were caught up in that system. So we want to remove the deadline. So those are just some of the bills that we're working on that we are going to be presenting on the floor in the next few days, and the ones we want to see get over the finish line into the assembly and signed by the governor.
So what's it like? So you're an organizer, but here you're going to have what? How many bills you're going to have on the floor this week?
This week I will have probably close to 7.
7. So you're going to have to give 7 speeches, right, on all these bills. What's the prep like for that, to get up and talk in front of this member, in front of everyone, logging on in their computer? I'm sure you're good at it. You just seem like a natural. But...
it is intimidating to be. That's a tough crowd. There's a lot going on. But I think these issues are important. And as I said, this isn't just about the 28th. It's about California, and every single senator has a constituent that is dealing with the issues that I'm raising on the floor. And so I think it's important for me to be prepared, obviously, to share that story and why I think these bills are important. But I think it's important for them to listen because they have constituents that are going to benefit from the protections that I will be lifting up. In terms of preparation, I've heard that these are going to be some long nights, and so keeping it short, but impact is
keep
what
your votes counted, right?
and impact is what's important. And so I think that in all seriousness, these are important issues, and I do believe, and in talking from committee and in talking with my colleagues about these bills, I think they understand that too. So, I'm looking forward to going to the floor and to hearing perspectives, questions. At the end of the day, we just got to get to the 21, and that's what I'm going to be focused on.
So, we were talking off camera before about how your committee assignments right now. When you came here, you had quite an ambitious list of committees you wanted to sit on. So kind of what'd you ask for and what'd you end up sitting on?
I know. I felt like I asked for, I think there was and I can't remember what the number was, like, give us 5. And I think I put a lot of asterisks down, like, well, maybe this one and maybe this one and maybe this one. I really am excited to be on the labor committee that speaks to my heart and my soul, and particularly, thinking about how we build the workforce of the future and what quality of life we need for the majority of Californians who have to work for a living. So I appreciate being on that committee. I'm on education committee, which is also critically important. I think of everything in terms of work and community, and that is our future. And California cannot be competitive if we don't have a strong K through 12 and higher ed system. So, really proud to be on that committee, and to be on Budget Sub 1, because, not only is it about preparing for the future, but, in some parts of my district, these public institutions are the only economic engines, right? And so how we pay folks, be it teachers or classified workers on college campuses, whether it's, faculty and administrators or the janitorial staff, all of those jobs matter. So really learned a lot on Budget Sub 1 and on education. I'm on the Business and Professions committee, which was also it's more episodic than the other committees, but getting a chance to really dig into industry and how the direction that the professions are going in. What are their sort of standards for licensure and certification, and understanding the difference between an optometrist and an ophthalmologist, and really getting into the weeds on some of that.
It's a blood feud there.
Well, but it's also like, getting back to workforce. Right. These are the industries that we need, and every single one of them. Scope of practice. And every single one is like, how do we bring more folks into our profession? Mm-hmm. And then Rules Committee is a committee that I sit on, which is so fascinating. It's the constant. It's the evergreen of all committees. It meets weekly, rain or shine, and it has a steady flow of approving the governor's appointments, Senate appointments, getting bills out, and meeting the folks who make the decisions in our agencies, like every single agency, whether it's CDRC, whether it's and the parole board, to the personnel board and the Office of Technology, really understanding how our government works and what are the challenges and opportunities of operating such a large enterprise, and the ways in which the administration and the legislature have to work together, on that. So I've really appreciated that committee, because the others sort of relate to some element of what is happening every day in a community. I think the Rules Committee is very unique, subject matter, very unique to just how the Capitol runs. So for me, it's been good to kind of understand that, and to really recognize how incredibly talented, like the folks who are running our various agencies and departments, how incredibly talented they are, how and committed, and for my constituents. So when we voted to appoint the head of our state prison system, I had over 100 folks reach out to me with questions and concerns, right? So this is a way that the people can engage in this conversation and to raise the things that they feel these agencies need to prioritize, need to do better on. need to course correct or to do more of, right? So I'm appreciating being, in some ways, that conduit directly into how our state operates outside of the traditional policy process. Yeah.
No, that's fascinating. So it's good. You got a budget sub. So it's budget month coming up here. After you get everything off the floor, you can really dig in and see what you can salvage here.
Yeah. It's it is. I am excited to hear from those legislators who have only legislated during a surplus. You know,
the last 8 years have been pretty crazy.
Right. Yeah. And coming from the UCLA Labor Center, I remember during the Schwarzenegger years, it was a situation where, our department within UCLA was blue penciled.
Right.
Like overnight, our whole
budget gone.
Our whole budget gone from it was the only went into the UCLA budget and just wiped it out. And and I remember furloughs and layoffs and how traumatic the decisions. We cut lunch or we cut Medi-Cal for cancer treatments for patients. I mean, it is a very humbling experience to go through that, and I think it's one where I know on the Senate we've spent a lot of time really trying to think about ways to ensure that with everything we can to avoid that scenario ever happening again. So really, believing in the rainy day funds, right? Really believing in, tucking away as much resource as we can to make sure, who knows what is going to happen on the federal level. It just seems to get more and more uncertain. We want to make sure that California stays solvent and that we continue the great work that we've done in terms of building up and investing and keeping our programs at a certain level and our services at an optimal level, while at the same time, being able to invest in our future. So it's going to be a continued, I think, long here on out, probably for the rest of my tenure here. It's going to be that hard conversation about how we do that. But knowing that we cannot and will not go back to the days where we're going to balance all of this on the backs of the most vulnerable. I mean, look at what's happening with our homelessness rate. There was a briefing that was held, and one of the things they pointed out in California, one of the fastest growing homeless populations are Black seniors, and fastest growing now. Wow. So it's sort of like this is a problem, a crisis that continues to fester and expand in places, and when it might start in one community, but if we don't significantly arrest and stop it, it will consume and move into others. And we don't want to see our grandparents on the streets. We don't want to see families who have struggled, and because they didn't have good jobs and they didn't feed into the safety net, now they're just on the street because their kids are at risk of homelessness. They love their grandparents, but they can't help them. And then because of the opportunities that they've had now that they are on the street. So these are really tough decisions, and we just have to stay committed to shared prosperity and making sure that we are growing California economies together.
No. Yeah. Don't envy you. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Fascinating talking to you. And I feel the people of the 28th Senate District are well represented. So
well, thank you so for this moment. I appreciate it. For the questions. It was a wonderful time.
All right. Thanks.